Well, there's nothing like a day in the park without Dave the Clone pulling the recorder out to record something for the good folks who still listen to us on all the feeds for the Hollow9ine Network. Thank you for sticking with us through all this time. It has been quite the endeavor, starting all the way back in 2006. And here we are in 2023, almost 20 full years, about 17 years later, right? That's pretty wild that we're just 3 years shy of 2 decades of history here. Though I guess there was that period we went dark where Dave the Clone was working with some other outfit out of Chicago. But since he was still working, we're going to still consider the thing to be. And the fact that the feeds just went cold and never disappeared proves that things never truly die. And so, just people, which is a very dark and sad way to start this off. But here comes the first edition of a new line of programs that will be filling the gaps between the seasons of our Spotlight interview show on the main feed. And we're calling it 15 Minutes of Movie Memories with Dave the Clone. This is where I'm going to be chilling out on the mic and just, rambling for 15 minutes or so about movies. The same thing we started this whole thing about back in 2006, talking about movies. Sometimes I'm sure we'll talk about TV shows too, because you can't really talk about one without the other. They just always sort of tend to bleed together, especially now with the sort of streaming media world we live in, where things, the lines do tend to get blurred. But this is really kind of like a return to the first level of aficionado, dating all the way back to when I, Dave the Clone, was in middle school even. The first opportunity to have those cafeteria talks. I mean, I guess in grade school or grammar school, depending on where in the world you're listening to this, you didn't realize, we called it the lunchroom, and the tables were all, designated by classes, as opposed to in middle school, which where I grew up was 6th grade through 8th grade, and then high school, which was 9th grade through 12th grade, it was the cafeteria where you were allowed to meander and find your clique, find your like-minded folks to sit there and chat about whatever it was you were chatting about. Who's trading the notes for the class that has the test tomorrow, or who wants to study, or who didn't do their homework. But for the most part, I was always sitting at the table with people who wanted to talk about movies. Especially, I remember in middle school, there were a couple of us who would basically do movie dialogue all day, and then lunch was sort of usually the jumping off point or the concluding point for that. I think our background music today is provided by the contractors across the street who didn't have music starting until I sat down and started doing this. Isn't it ironic how that happens? Well, it would not be fitting to do a show like this if we didn't start out the first movie to chat about for 15 minutes, because I could chat about this movie all damn day. 1995's Michael Mann LA crime epic, Heat. Partially inspired by the fact that it is currently on comicbook.com's top 40 movies available, top 40 best movies available to stream on Netflix right now, August 2023 edition. And the first one they list is Heat. A heist gone wrong leads to a high-stakes game of cat and mouse between a criminal mastermind and the hard-boiled detective obsessed with catching him. Very reductive description of the film. I almost can't start talking about this movie without immediately in my mind reverting all the way back to 1995. Now, I did not get to see it in theaters, and I can't really... That guy sounds like he needs some work done on his muffler. Anyway, I can't really remember why. It was definitely like 2 years shy of me being able to drive, so that definitely affected my ability to sort of choose. I would always have to either convince my parents or get lucky enough to get tagged along with friends who were going to see it, or get our parents to drop us off. But for some reason, Heat demarks an interesting point for me. It demarks a point where I started to discern movie types. And actually, that really kind of started with Pulp Fiction in 94, which would have been my freshman year of high school. But that was really when I started to kind of get into a groove of recognizing directorial tropes and characteristics that would separate films from each other, and really started to get an appreciation of movies that I liked as opposed to movies that I would watch with my parents or watch on TV or be told were cool. This was one of the first ones that I remember being, I don't know why, I think so. My parents had just separated, my mom had been starting to date again at that time, my dad had moved out, and I think when this movie became available on VHS, since I missed it in the theaters, I remember, and also it was big on cable. I know once it was sort of hit the home video market, it was kind of all over the place. It was a longer film, right? It was almost 3 hours long. It came on 2 cassette tapes when you rented it from the video store. And the first cassette tape ends right as the diner scene between Pacino and De Niro ends. And this was also one of the first DVDs I bought when I started my DVD collection in college. I was one of the first people. I went to college starting in 1998 through 2002, and in 99, during my sophomore year, I came home from fall break with a set-top like DVD player, kind of like the replacement for a VCR, although I still had a VCR as well. And at that time, there were only a handful of people on the campus that I went to, Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland, who had DVD players. Anyone else who had them as like DVD drives in their computers. So DVD was like kind of a brand new thing. And one of the things I loved about the Heat DVD, it did not have any deleted scenes. That didn't come until the Blu-ray releases several years later, and a whole format later. But it did come with the movie trailers, the original theatrical trailers and the TV trailers, and one of the trailers was all surrounding the fact that it was the first time Pacino and De Niro were going to collide and like act together in the same movie and be on screen together. Now a lot of people at that time were like, what are you talking about? Godfather Part 2, but you know, even the average moviegoer, the non-aficionado, the regular old movie-going Joe and Jill and Jack and Joan and whoever else, they would say, you know, yes, they were both in it, but they were never on screen together because they were portraying characters in 2 separated timelines. You know, De Niro playing the younger version of the Marlon Brando character from the original movie, while Pacino playing Brando's son, Michael. So they were separated by decades of time. So this was really the first movie where they were coming together, and that diner scene is where that culminated. So, you know, this is definitely one of those movies. It's very hard for me when someone says, you know, what are your top 10 favorite movies? My DVD collection, my Blu-ray collection, my streaming collection, like my lists and stuff are all so big that it's really hard to just give you 10 that's going to give you the full sort of effect of all the stuff that I like. Really? Like today was the day you guys had to be doing roofs over there? Like, I swear, I just can't win. This is not my month. I'm sitting in a park waiting to get raped for $1,100 on car repair that really popped up at one of the worst possible times it could. So in order to get through that malaise, I'm starting a new podcast here and getting back to you know, something I love, something positive, something that feels like I'm being productive. And it's ironic that all these things, when you think about movies, when I think about movies, always goes to Heat right away, which then of course elevates Michael Mann on my list. You know, for the longest time, my go-to answer for who's your favorite director was Tarantino, but I think that was just because Pulp Fiction was such a shock to the system. It was something that was so new when it came out, and it was a year before Heat, and Heat was my introduction to Michael Mann. Now, of course, once you get introduced to Michael Mann, if you hadn't already known about Michael Mann, the next sort of leap goes down into the Manhunter sort of territory, and Thief as a precursor to Heat, Manhunter being sort of a precursor to Silence of the Lambs, and the first on-screen portrayal of Hannibal Lecter by the incredibly talented Brian Cox of recent Succession accolades. And that's where you saw William Patterson playing Bill Graham, and it had that cool factor. You know, that's something that Michael Mann is very good at doing, is making all of his characters look cool. And Heat was really the first time that it impressed upon me to sort of like, oh wow, look at how he's dressing the heist masterminds. You know, these are highline criminals. They're not street thugs. They're guys who can go in and clean out an entire metal depository or precious metals depository and not kill anybody if they don't need to. You know, the movie Heat opens with this, you know, broad daylight armored car heist, which everything about the way it comes together, it just like, you know, I remember sitting in my living room with like, I would eat in the living room. I know my mom wasn't always thrilled about that, but when no one else was home, I was old enough to be left by myself, especially too, I think in the summertime, and around this particular time, my sisters would be at summer camp, and I was sort of dabbling in, like, I was a day camp counselor, you know, but I would have the nights and the evenings to myself at the house if my mom was out. So I remember plenty of nights where my choice of films was Heat. I was really into long form movies as well, so I think that around that time the VHS release of the Nick Garris The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand, that had been a miniseries on TV, was also a double cassette. So I would, you know, when I had the place to myself, I would sit down and watch these movies. Usual Suspects gets thrown into this collection too. In fact, there was a day at my old job during the summer where all the veterans were on vacation, so all the people that had been working there for more years than I had been had decided to schedule their vacations around the same time. That just left me, our summer intern, and our most junior producer working for this one particular week. And I said to them, hey guys, Thursday, keep your afternoons clear. We're going to spend the day watching movies on the big screen in the control room. And I brought in Heat, and I brought in The Usual Suspects, and we watched them back to back, and two heist movies, very different styles, but one of the things that the junior producer came out and said when we were in between movies, and I think we watched Heat first, was, you know, watching these movies makes you feel as cool as the characters in them. And that's definitely something that I think has resonated from Heat for all of these years for me. I mean, when you look at the cast, it's like a mega cast. It's almost like a super band, you know, between Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore, may he rest in peace, Al Pacino, why am I blanking? Wes Studi, who's incredible. At that time I had only known him from playing Native American parts in Dances with Wolves and Last of the Mohicans, which I had seen prior to Heat, not knowing that it was a Michael Mann movie. At least I think the time works out on that. I'll have to look up to make sure I didn't just mess up chronology. But yeah, I know, because I was watching Last of the Mohicans in middle school, so it definitely came out before. But that was, again, it came out in that time before my appreciation of film had evolved to that point where I was starting to say, okay, this movie's got something about it. Let me look up who made it, and then let me look at his other movies, and then you start to put together, you start to follow the patterns, like, oh, okay, so all the bad guys are always wearing a suit with no tie and the top button unbuttoned, right? And so it's sort of this, like, semi, what I call criminal business casual. You know what I mean? And that is something that you can kind of trace through all of his movies. I think there's even a certain degree of it in Public Enemies, much, much later. But Public Enemies was a period piece. Public Enemy, the Dillinger movie starring Johnny Depp. But even that has the same, you admire these criminals, and they kind of frame choosing a life of highline crime as just a choice, like the way someone would choose what to major in college, right? So, you know, they grab you with the technical aspects of it because they pull off this broad daylight robbery. Let's wait for Mr. Inadequacy truck driver over here. Ironically, it was a truck like that they used to ram into the armored car and knock it over to literally knock it over. And then that same level of technical prowess continues throughout the movie into the big bank heist. And then one of the things, too, that stands about the bank heist is that they left all that natural sound. I mean, all the gunshots, you're actually hearing the echoes from them having this, like, broad daylight LA main drag machine gun fight. And they decided to use the audio that they captured, and it's like all this reverberating gunfire. I remember hearing stories about actual war veterans having their PTSD triggered when they went to see this in the theaters because of how real it sounded. And in fact, there's a scene in the midst of the big gunfight where Val Kilmer is firing at the police in one direction, drops to his knees to reload his weapon, drops out the magazine, pops a new one in, pulls the slide back, and like the technique he does it with, and then he fires in one direction, stops, turns, fires behind them because they're, getting attacked on both sides by the police. And the U.S. Marines have been using that scene and showing it to people during training, saying this is the most perfect execution of the way you should be reloading in a high-pressure firefight. So kudos to Michael Mann for, and that's something about all of his movies. He's very technically, like the same way Michael Crichton used to like find an interesting fact and then expand a story around that. It's sort of the opposite. Like Michael Mann finds something cool to make a movie about, and then he learns how all the real practitioners and people proficient in those skills would do it. So I think I probably have already gone over 15 minutes for the first episode here, but it's really just like a 15-minute gush fest. I'll even give myself a 5-minute window, 15 to 20 minutes, and who knows, this may even expand out to a full half hour at some point. But Heat by Michael Mann, from 1995, definitely part of what I call the lexicon of cool, not only because of how awesome the movie is, and it's another one of these sort of, at times, more often than not, quiet and dialogue. And this is something that definitely is a hallmark of Michael Mann films, is he does not care he doesn't make sure that there's exposition that is like the so on the nose, making sure you understand. It's as if you're catching conversations that you could be walking past in a public place, and if you stop where you are, you'll hear the whole thing, but you might not know everybody's name, and you might not know how the conversation started. And if you're sharp enough, you'll be able to get what the conversation's about without having those things. But I know that was a complaint when this movie came out, was that some people were like, I just didn't get it because there are all these conversations going on. And now I've watched the movie so many times I've lost count. So I could say, oh, I've watched it so many times I went back and made sure I connected all the dots. I understand who's talking about who, when, where, why. But that's something that I think is like interesting about the way Michael Mann's films work, and it adds to that cool factor because it's almost like they're speaking another language at times that if you understand, you're kind of like wink wink nudge nudge in the know. And not a lot of films. Tarantino is similar because of the way he creates lingo. So he is someone who wants you to be drawn into the fact that a lot of the scenes are heavy on the dialogue and reliant on the dialogue to push the story forward. Whereas for Michael Mann, it's just a part of the formula, but it's an important part, and it is what pushes the story forward. And so I think for me, evolving my fandom of Heat over the years, it was one of the first movies that really just kind of made me start watching movies differently, but then sort of growing with it and constantly coming back and feeling like it hasn't lost anything. In fact, it gains from the repeated viewings. You really start to pick up on that. I felt like I was in the club for understanding who was who and what was what. And some people, this is another thing notorious in Michael Mann movies, like it's almost like Jason Statham's very, very, very brief cameo in the beginning of Collateral. There will be people listed in the opening credits of the movie as the opening credits are running with the music, and you're like, oh wow, Tone Loc is gonna be in this, and he's in one scene. Very quick, couple lines of dialogue. You know what I mean? Hank Azaria, he got 2 scenes. But, that is something Michael Mann does a lot, where it's like, it's a big deal that this person's in the movie, and then he, she, they are only in one scene. And sometimes, Tom Noonan, who is, the Red Dragon in Manhunter, he was the main antagonist. has one scene that comes out of nowhere and is a very pivotal scene because he's the one who hires them to hit the bank. And he plays it and so it's kind of almost like being in the theater club in high school and college, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm in that, I'm only in one scene and I really get to kill it, but there's this whole ensemble and it wouldn't be complete if you weren't there, but there's always just that little bit that kind of almost makes you wish there was more, but it's like a delicate mixture. And Michael Mann and his editor Dante Spinotti very, very adept at making that work, that balance. Even Danny Trejo, like, you see him more than he has any dialogue, and it's a small part but a pivotal part as well. It's very, very cool stuff. So 20 minutes on heat there and the 15 minutes of movie memories with Dave the Clone. Thank you for checking us out. As always, check out all the rest of the stuff going on at the Hollow9ine Network. If you want to join in the conversation, hollow9podcast@gmail.com is the place to send your correspondence. It's the word hollow, the number 9, INE podcast, all one big word, at gmail.com. And put 15 minutes of movies in the subject line, and we'll see what's what, and we'll see what we can read on the air. I'm not sure what we're going to do next, so you just got to keep it tuned in here to see what other movies come up. Until then, I am Dave the Clone. Enjoy your time at the films, wherever you watch them, stream them, Netflix and chill them, or if you actually go out and dine in theater them, whatever it is, enjoy.
You've been listening to the Hollow9ine Network, bringing you the very best in fan-made media. That's the word hollow, the number 9, INE. Find the Hollow9ine Network on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Email us at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. Leave us your feedback. Join in the conversation and be a part of the action. Join in the fun. Hollow9ine.